This is a brief introduction to how to talk about knowing in German. In German, as in many other languages, especially European languages, there are two types of knowing. And you might describe these two types of knowing as personal knowledge, that is, things that you personally know well, and general knowledge, that is, things which other people, anybody, can know and become aware of. Or perhaps better names for these categories are familiarity and awareness. And the verb we use in German for familiarity, being personally familiar with something, is kennen. But the verb we use for being aware of something, especially a fact or an idea, is wissen. Here are examples of both types of knowing, and you might like to pause the video as I list all of these examples on the left and attempt to categorize them as either kennen in the second column or wissen in the third column. A fact or idea, which one is that? That is definitely awareness. That is something of which anybody can become aware, and so we use the verb wissen. What about a piece of trivia? Well, that's exactly the same. It's simply an idea to become aware of, not something or someone to become familiar with. A friend or acquaintance, that is definitely kennen. You become familiar with someone, having known them for a while. What about an answer to a question? Again, that is an idea or a fact of which one becomes aware. But someone's strengths and weaknesses might not be someone, him or herself, but they are certainly personal characteristics which you get to know, which you become familiar with if you know someone. So we use kennen for that. The location of something is wissen. A specialist subject area. There's specialist knowledge there which you have to acquire and with which you have to become very familiar, and so that is kennen. A particular city, perhaps your hometown, well, that is also kennen, because that is a particular place with particular characteristics with which one becomes familiar. Of course, we also need to know the conjugation of both verbs of knowing, and so we have our 6 persons on the left and kennen and wissen on the right, and of course we need to know as well the past participle so that we can use these verbs in the past tense. Kennen is conjugated as follows: Ich kenne, du kennst, sie es kennt, wir kennen, ihr kennt, sie kennen. There are no surprises there. It's perfectly regular. All the endings you'll recognize, but the past participle is slightly different. It's gekannt, and you'll notice this change of vowel. Hat gekannt instead of gekennt. And so that's something to watch out for if you're describing knowledge of someone or something in the past tense. Wissen is more irregular. Ich weiß, du weißt, sie es weiß. And I'm going to pause there and alert you to the fact that this verb wissen actually follows the pattern of modal verb conjugation. Notice with these first 3 verbs, the singular forms of wissen in the present tense, there's no E and T for the ich and the sie es forms, but rather they're exactly the same. And this is the same pattern that you would expect with a modal verb, but the plural forms are, as usual, perfectly regular. Wir wissen, ihr wisst, sie wissen. And the past participle has, again, a vowel change, this time to a U. Hat gewusst. Here's a clue to sentence formation. If you're using kennen, you're mostly dealing with people or people's characteristics. And so you're mostly going to be using nouns. For example, him, or that song, or her strengths. You're using nouns, and that's what to expect straight after kennen. Wissen, on the other hand, is mostly dealing with facts or ideas, and therefore you can expect not just single words or single nouns, but whole sentences or clauses. For example, what to do, or where it is, or why we have to go, or that he's upset. These are all clauses which contain bits of knowledge, which are facts or ideas, which therefore follow wissen. Finally, here are some example sentences, and I've got the English on the left and the German on the right. What I encourage you to do is to pause the video now and to see how many you can translate correctly into German, and then we'll go through them. To start with, I know that. Well, we're dealing with a fact or an idea, something. I know that, it's not a person, and so we're going to use wissen. Ich weiß das. You know him. Du kennst ihn. Well, we're dealing with a person, aren't we, with whom you are familiar. Therefore, we use kennen. But what's the difference to the next one? You know something about him. Du weißt etwas über ihn. This time we use wissen in the du form, which is weißt, because you're knowing something. It's a fact or an idea. It's not him himself. You're not familiar with this thing. You're familiar with him. And so we use wissen for the something. What about you haven't met him yet? Du hast ihn noch nicht kennengelernt. Now this is a past tense form of the verb kennenlernen. And I'm going to alert you here to this very common verb, kennenlernen, which means to meet or to get to know someone. And it's just putting together the verbs kennen, to know someone, and lernen, to learn. But if you use them in the past tense, you're going to put the GE, as with separable verbs, in the middle. You're going to put it in the middle. Kennengelernt. I don't know. Ich weiß es nicht. This is an abstract idea. It's not someone or something or a place with which you're familiar. I know exactly what you mean. Ich weiß genau, was du meinst. This is an example of what I talked about before, which is a whole clause following the verb wissen. It's a piece of knowledge which is contained in a whole clause after a comma. Max and Anna know each other already. Max und Anna kennen sich schon. They're two people who are knowing each other. They are familiar with each other. They know each other in that way. Therefore, we use kennen. They know that it's important. Here's another example of a whole clause after the verb to know. Sie wissen, dass es wichtig ist. This is a classic example of using wissen with a das clause, where the verb goes to the end. And we're using wissen because it is a fact or an idea. He knows where the train station is. Weiß, wo der Bahnhof ist. This is the location of the train station. It's not knowing the train station personally or in a familiar way. It's knowing the location. That's a fact of which anyone can become aware. Therefore, we use wissen. I know myself. Ich kenne mich. This time, it's myself that I am familiar with, perhaps my strengths or my weaknesses, and therefore we use kennen. She didn't know anything about it. This is another past tense form. So you're going to have to use the past participle for the verb to know. Sie hat nichts davon gewusst. And we're going to use wissen in its past tense form because it is something abstract. It's an idea of which she was not aware. And finally, I used to know him. Ich habe ihn früher gekannt. This is another past tense form, this time using the past participle for kennen, because it's him. It's him, it's a person with whom I used to be familiar.